I've been on the hunt for a new pair of monitors to level up my mixing and mastering for the past few months, and I finally picked something up. For the past few years, I've been mixing on a pair of Yamaha HS5s with the matching Yamaha subwoofer, as well as a pair of Adam T7Vs, which you may remember me reviewing a few years ago on this channel. After a lot of deliberation and conversations with my audio engineer friends, scouring reviews online and more, I settled on picking up a pair of Kali Audio's IN-8 V2 monitors. In fact, another engineer friend of mine raved about these, saying that these were the best pair of monitors you can get for under $1,000. As I filmed this video, the IN-8 V2s retail for $399 USD per monitor on Sweetwater, so basically about $800 for the pair. After unboxing them, setting them up, and getting some work done on them, I've developed my own opinion that I want to share with you throughout the rest of this video. But first, let's answer the big question. Out of all the monitors that are out there, why did I choose this set in particular? For most of my career, I've primarily been mixing and mastering on two-way monitors, and that includes the sets of monitors that I have right now. A two-way monitor consists of a speaker with two separate drivers, a woofer and a tweeter. The woofer is responsible for reproducing low frequencies, including bass and lower mid-range, while the tweeter handles higher frequencies, being the upper mid-range and treble. And honestly, I didn't really think I was missing much. However, over time, I've learned that since the woofer has to handle the mid-range and the bass frequencies, and the tweeter also has to handle the mid-range and the treble, there could be compromises in the clarity of the mid-range as a whole. Of course, this varies monitor to monitor, some handle it better than others, but this really intrigued me as I had to wonder if I was missing something. Have I been limiting myself in my mixes by only using a two-way speaker system? Am I really getting an inaccurate perception of the mid-range of my mixes by using two-way monitors only? And the answer to both of those questions is yes. And that's where the Kali Audio IN-8 V2 comes into play. The IN-8 is a three-way monitor. That means it uses 3 drivers instead of 2. An 8-inch woofer for the low frequencies, a dedicated 4-inch mid-range driver for the mids of course, and a 1-inch tweeter for the high frequencies. Because of the dedicated mid-range driver, three-way monitors can provide a more accurate and detailed representation of this critical frequency range. The reality is most sounds occupy the mid-range and share it in some capacity, so being able to hear it clearly and accurately is extremely important. And that means a three-way monitor will ultimately provide more insight in how your mix really sounds, especially within the mid-range in comparison to a two-way monitor. The challenge though is while there's a lot of three-way monitor options out there, they can be extremely pricey. We're talking thousands of dollars just for one monitor, let alone a pair. So when I was doing research on this earlier, I found that Kali Audio had the most budget-friendly option available when it comes to three-way monitors specifically, and that's what had me interested in the first place. And despite them being more affordable than their competition, it doesn't mean that they sound cheap, as we're going to discuss further in a moment. Visually speaking, the IN-8s look great. They come in 3 colors, white, black, and a new tungsten color, the latter of which is available exclusively at Sweetwater. This means they should be able to match the vibe and aesthetic of pretty much any studio environment. I've obviously got the white pair here, which is a nice switch up from my past all black sets of monitors, and I do like the contrast of the black cones specifically. Now, unlike some monitors, these can be positioned both vertically and horizontally depending on your preference. I was also told that these don't need to be broken in, they should sound good right out of the box, and this much I can confirm so far. On the back of the monitor, you'll find some standard inputs, including ports for power and 3 input options, XLR, RCA, and TRS. I typically use an XLR as I connect these monitors to a monitor control station, which allows me to seamlessly switch between different sets of monitors and enable or disable my subwoofer simultaneously. There's also a built-in EQ in each monitor, which is highlighted in blue. Towards the top of the backside, you'll notice diagrams showing suggested EQ settings to optimize the sound based on how you mount the monitors. The EQ also includes a low and high frequency boost and trim, allowing you to adjust the low end below 280 Hz and the high end above 2800 Hz by plus or minus 2 dB. Since I have the monitors set up vertically on a low-rise speaker stand on my desk with about 3 feet or 0.91 meters of distance between the back of the monitor and the wall, I've tested out a few of these EQ settings. In the end, I found that the flat EQ setting seems to work best for my setup, at least at this time, but overall, having a built-in EQ is a smart and handy feature that should help you optimize the sound of these monitors no matter what type of listening environment or mounting situation you have in your studio. And another simple feature that I've come to appreciate is the light on the front of the monitor that indicates when it's powered on. Sure, it's simple, but this was one of my main complaints with my Adam T7Vs after I got them, the fact that there was no visual indicator on the front of the monitor to let you know if it was actually powered on. Now, before we dive into how these monitors actually sound, let's first discuss the elephant in the room. or more accurately, the room itself and the acoustic treatment within it. This is a critical factor in how any monitors, including these ones, will perform. While my space isn't perfectly treated, I've made efforts to reduce reflections and optimize the overall sound of the space since moving in just a few months ago. I'll leave more details on the room and its treatment down in the description below, but rest assured, this setup should be treated enough to give these monitors a fair evaluation and should mirror what a lot of you are working with at home. So now that you have an understanding of my room, its treatment, and the general placement of the monitors when I'm using them, let's talk about how they actually sound. According to third-party measurements, the IN-8s have a relatively flat and consistent frequency response, which I'll leave on screen right now for you to review. While no monitor is perfectly flat, the only notable deviations with the IN-8s are a slight dip in the highs around 8 to 10 kHz and a slight lift above 15 kHz. Kali Audio actually addresses this 8 to 10K dip on their website specifically, saying, because of the IN series coincident architecture, you may notice a dip between 8 to 10 kHz when measuring with a single stationary microphone. The dip is an on-axis diffraction artifact of the mid-range baffle interface. It is evident in on-axis measurements, but not in total sound power. Perception of timbre should be neutral in most rooms. It is not recommended to apply room correction EQs to the INs based on single-point static measurements. This essentially means that the dip you see in the measurements is an artifact of the testing method, and not something that affects real-world listening for most users. For comparison, here's the frequency response of the Atom T7Vs, which I'm replacing with these Kali monitors. While the T7Vs also have a broad frequency range, you can see a lot more fluctuations in their measurements, with more noticeable peaks and dips, and overall less consistency. In fairness, this isn't an apples-to-apples comparison since we're comparing a two-way speaker design to a three-way design. But I imagine if you're watching this video, it's because you're probably thinking of upgrading from a two-way system to a three-way system like I'm proposing here. Or you're really smart and thinking of getting your first pair of monitors by starting with a three-way system. Either way, I'll be making a lot of comparisons to my current set of two-way monitors since that's the reference point that I'm coming from and the reason why I'm upgrading altogether. With that in mind, the IN-8s ultimately offer a more balanced presentation of the frequency spectrum, with more detail and precision, especially in the mid-range as you can expect. These monitors have a frequency response of 37 Hz to 25 kHz and a frequency range of 45 Hz to 21K, with each of the three drivers responsible for a specific part of that range. The mid-range to tweeter crossover point happens at 2800 Hz, so the tweeter handles from 2800 Hz and above. The mid-range to woofer crossover happens at 280 Hz, meaning the mid-range driver covers from 280 Hz to 2800 Hz, and finally the woofer handles everything from 280 Hz and below. For comparison, my two-way Atom T7Vs have a crossover at 2300 Hz. That means the tweeter handles frequencies from 2300 Hz and up, and the woofer covers 2300 Hz and down. Many two-way monitors have a similar crossover point, typically ranging somewhere from 1K to 3K depending on the monitor. The problem is this setup often lacks the detail and accuracy of having a dedicated mid-range driver like the one you'd find on the IN-8s. Honestly, at first they almost sounded dull, and I don't mean this necessarily in a bad way, but you gotta understand that prior to this, I was always listening to speakers that had some form of hyping and exaggeration on the frequency spectrum, which often sounded more pleasing to the ear. However, when it comes to mixing and mastering, we don't want our monitors to lie to us by hyping up frequencies. We need speakers that give us an honest reference point of our mix, empowering us to hear it for what it truly is and make better decisions to improve it. And I can confidently say that's the case with the IN-8s, especially once you get used to them. And even with that slight lift at 15 kHz, it's not as noticeable as the fluctuations I experienced with other monitors in the past. Now, another common issue with two-way monitors, and one that I've also experienced in the past, is achieving accurate spatial imaging. While a lot of two-way monitors do a decent job of stereo imaging, their design can sometimes cause spatial information to get lost, especially above and below the speakers or when you move around them. In other words, the stereo image might not stay consistent around every listening position. The IN-8s, however, address this in a way that I found to be pretty noticeable in my use cases so far. Kali Audio mentions that the tweeter and mid-range drivers share an acoustic center, which means they're positioned in a way that makes them sound like they're coming from the same spot from the listener's perspective. In many two-way designs, the tweeter and woofer are separated, which can create a slight delay in how the sound from each driver reaches you, and make it harder to pinpoint the exact placement of sounds. With the IN-8s, the alignment between the tweeter and mid-range helps keep timing more accurate, which results in a clearer stereo image, especially in those frequency areas. And with their woofer placement, the sound from the low and mid frequencies reaches you almost simultaneously. In practice, this means I've found the IN-8s to offer more consistency in sound quality clarity and spatial representation, no matter where I'm positioned around them. I also like to get up and move around the room to hear how the mix sounds from different vantage points. A lot of this depends on the room that I'm mixing in more so than the monitors, but sometimes you need to step back or even listen from outside the room to really gauge how the bass is coming through, for example. When I'm doing this, I'm not hearing the typical shifts in balance or loss of spatial accuracy as I would experience commonly in the past with my previous sets of monitors. Whether I'm sitting directly in front or off to the side or even behind the monitors, the stereo field feels cohesive, and I can always pinpoint where sounds are placed in the mix, more so than with my previous sets of monitors. Really, it's nice to be able to trust that what I'm hearing is an honest representation of my mix, and so far it's been translating well into other systems too. Now, another big challenge of using two-way monitors worth discussing is distortion. In a two-way system, the woofer handles both the deep bass and the lower mid-range as we've previously discussed. The problem is that when the woofer produces deep bass, it moves significantly, creating unwanted vibrations. These vibrations can interfere with the mid-range clarity, reducing its accuracy and making it harder to hear details in the mix. I definitely noticed this with my two-way monitors, especially when monitoring at a louder volume. At louder levels, the woofer would vibrate, and while the effect wasn't always so obvious in isolation, it definitely altered my perception of the mid-range. In that way, comparing it to the IN-8s was eye-opening. At the same volume levels that caused noticeable movement on my Atom T7Vs and Yamaha HS5s, the IN-8's woofer remained nearly motionless. Since mid-range duties are handled by a separate driver, the woofer can focus exclusively on the deep bass, which reduces distortion and improves sound reproduction. Essentially, the three-way design keeps each driver working within its optimal range, and according to Kali Audio, the mid-range driver itself moves less than 1 millimeter, staying almost completely still while delivering precise, clear sound that complements the tweeter and woofer. This design minimizes interference and ensures greater clarity, which is especially noticeable when mixing tracks with deep bass like I often am. And even when pushed hard, the IN-8's woofer vibrates far less than my two-way monitors. Those vibrations don't affect the mid since they're handled by an entirely different driver. And I rarely monitor that loud anyways when I'm mixing and mastering. But switching to the IN-8s really made me realize how important this driver separation is. It's one of those things you don't always notice until you compare it directly, just like I have. But once you do, the difference in clarity is totally undeniable. Another standout feature of the IN-8s is their powerful low-end reproduction, thanks to the 8-inch woofer and overall larger size. This is especially important for someone like me who mixes a lot of hip-hop and afro, where perceiving the low end is critical. But with the Kali Audio IN-8s, the bass response is not only audible but also tangible. You can really feel the low frequencies, even at extremes. That gives me the confidence that I'm hearing everything in my mix, including the low frequencies exactly as they are. And even if I was worried that I wasn't, I could always make some adjustments to the EQ on the back, as mentioned earlier, to add 2 dB to the low end if I really felt the need. With the IN-8s, I feel like I'm finally hearing my music as it's meant to be heard, for better and for worse, with incredible detail and precision across the treble, mid-range, and bass. This level of accuracy has confirmed the quality of my previous work, while also revealing flaws that were masked by the limitations of my previous two-way monitors. The clarity and positioning of my mid-range in particular has significantly and noticeably improved, which honestly makes sense since the IN-8s let me hear that range a lot more clearly. They really are an incredible upgrade over what I've been using in the past, and even though I took a risk and got them blindly without actually auditioning or hearing them in person, I can confidently say now that they're worth it and I don't regret my decision. I really don't think you're going to find a better monitor at that $399 each price point, at least I haven't, but of course that's just my opinion so far. If you're still unsure after watching this video, I'd recommend you go down to your local music shop, assuming they have them in stock, and try to play some music through them to hear them and experience what they sound like firsthand. And if that's not an option, the good news is you can actually buy these monitors through Sweetwater, where you'll have 30 days to return them hassle-free if you're not satisfied. But honestly, after you hear them, I doubt it'll come to that. So to quickly sum things up, for a price that's not too far off from most two-way systems, and significantly cheaper than most three-way systems, you can get a pair of high-end monitors that are even more accurate and revealing. Once again, thanks to their three-way design and consistent frequency response. That means you'll be able to make more accurate decisions and hear your music the way that it was meant to be heard. Honestly, I think this is the bare bare minimum anyone should be using to mix their music, assuming you take mixing and mastering as seriously as I do. Consider me a believer, just like my engineer friends who recommended this monitor to me in the first place. I'll leave links to the IN-8s and their smaller IN-5 counterparts down in the description below if you're curious to check them out yourself. And if you've used them in the past, feel free to comment your experience down below to offer more insight and help your fellow mixers out there that are considering picking these up. If you have any questions about these monitors, also feel free to drop them in the comments below, and I'm going to do my best to get back to everyone. If you got value out of the video, please smash that like button, and of course subscribe if you're new to see more mixing tips and content like this in the future. I'll also leave some other videos on screen for you to watch next, and I look forward to helping y'all again soon. Peace.
5